So in chapter 3, we have a little bit of going into another story. So we started out with the story of the person in modernish times, talking to the stranger and reading the stranger's book. Now, inside of the stranger's book, where we are, he has Merlin telling a story. So here you have Merlin's story inside of the stranger's book, inside of the story of the person meeting the stranger, inside of the book of Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's court. So here we have, we're nested several levels deep. It's a fairly common practice in stories to do things like that. The Tales 1001 Arabian Nights has much the same framing device, where it's Scheherazade telling stories to her little sister, and the little sister falling asleep, just like the people fell asleep during Merlin. So what happened during the 1001 Nights is Scheherazade asks, hey, can I tell a story to my sister so she can fall asleep? And she starts telling the story, and the sister falls asleep. So the next night she starts telling the story more, and the sister falls asleep. And the next night she finishes telling the story and then starts another one, and then the sister falls asleep. And this goes on for like 2.5 years. So that's this 1001 Arabian Nights. Here we have Merlin telling a story and everyone falling asleep, to the point where a mouse is dancing on the king's head. Now, background on some of these stories, because these are the Arthur tales are so entrenched in Western literature that they're everywhere. So we have Arthur, who's king. We have Lancelot, who is his chief knight. And we have Guinevere. Now, Guinevere is the queen of Camelot. She is Arthur's wife. And so here she is up on the balcony, and you have the people who are taken prisoners begging for her mercy. So they're prisoners. They belong to the knight who captured them and to the king, because the king is in charge of everything. And the tradition was that they asked for mercy from the queen. Now, they talked about the look that Lancelot gave Guinevere that would get you shot in Arkansas. Now, in the histories, in the stories, Lancelot had an affair with Guinevere, and Arthur expelled him from Camelot and was going to burn Guinevere at the stake, because that's what kings did when their queens had affairs. And then Lancelot rode in and saved her, and they rode off into the sunset, and Camelot just fell into disrepair because it lost its moral center. So anyway, so that's Lancelot. That's him with the look that'll get him shot in Arkansas. And so this kind of goes into the whole theory of how the narrator was talking about how these people seem to be naive and gullible and overly trusting of things. So we'll see how that goes if he manages to use that to his advantage somehow. But we have Merlin show up. Now, Merlin is King Arthur's wizard. And Merlin has various powers told in different stories. And, he's the general magic. Make fire, make lightning. Make fire, make lightning, make fog, turn battle. So Merlin is a pretty powerful character. And all of these, he's an advisor to the king. So there's a lot of these stories. The Arthurian legends are told and retold and retold. And so you have Monty Python and the Holy Grail is one of them ones. You have the original La Mort d'Arthur, the death of Arthur. You have the Sword in the Stone. So the sword that King Arthur got there was Excalibur. And there's different stories about how Arthur got Excalibur. The story here is that the Lady of the Lake gave the sword to Arthur, showing that he was going to be king. Another version of the story is that the sword was stuck through an anvil into a rock. And whoever pulled the sword would be king. And, it was set up like this. And people would come from all around to try and pull the sword out of the stone. And nobody could do it, and nobody could do it. And it fell into disrepair. And there was a massive tournament going on of knights fighting. And so what they would do is they would joust, and they would have combat with swords. And the idea was that whoever won the fight was going to be king and was going to rule over them all. So it was whoever was the best fighter, whoever was the best at battle would be the one who would be the king. Because in that age, it was lots of war. So you have the knights who have the armor. They go out and they fight other knights, and they take land, and they take serfs, prisoners, gold, whatever. So it was pretty much thievery. But the idea was that, they pick the best one at fighting so that, they can just thieve better. And the person who Arthur was young. He was a young boy. He was 10-ish, 12-ish. So he was a page, and he was just a guy who runs around and fetches. So you'd have the page go and fetch you water. You'd have the page go and polish your armor. You would have the page go and yada, yada, yada. So anyway, the knight who Arthur was paging for, and I can't remember his name. I'll find it later. I'll bring it up in a different video. But the knight he was paging for forgot his sword back at the tent. So Arthur ran off to go get the sword. But the sword wasn't in the tent. Somebody had taken the sword. Yeah, as I said, they're all thieves. So Arthur runs off. He sees the sword in the anvil. And he goes, pulls it out. Runs and gives it to the knight. And the knight is like, yes, I have a sword. And he looks down and he sees the sword. It's like, this is Excalibur. This is the sword. Who did you get? Where'd you get it? Arthur said, I pulled it out of the stone, because he was unaware of the myth. So all of these are various different legends of how he got it. One, as I said, the lady in the lake offered it to him. Another one, he pulled it out of the stone. On his death, on Arthur's death, a knight tosses it back into the lady of the lake, and her hand reaches up and catches it. But there is a promise that Arthur makes, that he's going to pay her back for the sword. Now, this is an impressive sword, an impressive magical sword, impressive magical scabbard. And so in stories like this, when you have a deal with supernatural forces, it's always very monkey paw-ish, or Rumpelstiltskin, where, the person says, okay, I owe you a favor. And it's just like the Godfather, too. The mafioso. Someday I'll ask you for a favor. And it's always something far more horrible than anything you would think of. Well, that's Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin was like, okay, I'll make this gold for you, but you'll owe me something. And then he came to claim her child. So all of these things, Arthur's making a deal for a sword, and he isn't quite sure what the payment is going to be. So I can't even remember what the payment ended up being, but I'm pretty sure it was something tragic.